With us now is an expert on state tax policy and Forbes contributor, Travis Brown. He is the president of Let Voters Decide. And Travis, thanks so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, Mitt Romney wants to cut all individual tax rates by 20%, eliminate the estate tax and the alternative minimum tax, and at least keep the current preferences for capital gains. He also wants an extension of the Bush-era tax cuts. Can Mitt Romney's tax proposals fuel economic growth while remaining revenue neutral?
Well, I believe that they can, and in fact, I think there's much debate about that throughout the last few weeks and over the next few as well. What we know from many economists looking at many decades of evidence is that when you can lower marginal tax rates, you see economic expansion. I think that's part of the reason that the Romney administration is looking seriously at how to get back to at least 3 or 4% GDP growth in this country. It's absolutely important that we increase that growth. We know we can only do that on one way, which is private sector investment.
All right, the Obama camp says there's no way the Romney plan will work without blowing a hole in the deficit or raising taxes on middle-class families. With all of the negative campaign ads, who should we believe?
Well, it's going to take a leader, I think, in Washington to be bipartisan. And I think what you have between the two campaigns are very different views about how to approach this problem. As we've said, we need private sector investment, and that comes from private sector growth. I think many Americans understand and can see through that the policies of more spending without corrections and controls are going to result in more of the same. And I think it's incumbent on America to take a look and simplify the tax code and make it a stronger position for all working Americans in the next few years. If we don't do that, I think there's many people concerned about the direction of this country.
Now, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke says the U.S. economy is headed for a massive tax cliff. What happens if the Bush-era tax cuts expire, the payroll tax cut expires, and new taxes are enacted as part of Obamacare? What happens if all of this occurs?
Well, I think there's been a lot of great arguments and facts. You know, when you look at any kind of marginal tax increase, and Congress and courts have now determined that these things are tax increases, what you see are lower rates of return from all investments in future projects. So if those things were to be corrected or mitigated, you have the opportunity to see an increased rate of return on all future projects, and that's what would create the economic stimulus that everyone needs. So it's absolutely important that we make these corrections in the right way, in a responsible way, pass Congress this fall and in the first part of 2013, because what you want to see is a signal to everyone around the world that America is fixing itself, and we're going to provide additional return on all future projects by keeping the uncertainty of new taxes or higher taxes from current programs that have been adopted. And I think that's why the election is so important.
All right, do you have any confidence at all that Washington will be able to avert this so-called fiscal cliff? What is the most likely outcome?
Well, I think the most likely outcome is you're going to need serious people at the table, and I think that there's been so much time in waiting for this presidential election that I think you're going to see a number of different proposals and a range and a spectrum of opportunities and choices within the tax code. Everyone knows, including the president, knows that the tax code we have now isn't fair, isn't simple, is adding rules and regulations literally every day that don't make sense and get in the way of common sense investments. So I think there is going to be a really serious effort for national tax reform, at least by January, possibly sooner than that. And that's why it's so important that Americans are voting on those issues right now.
Travis, you say that state taxes are ripe for reform, and many governors around the country are leading the charge to reduce or do away with their state income taxes altogether. How can changes happening at the state level have a major impact on U.S. economic performance?
Yeah, well, one of our Supreme Court justices coined the phrase the laboratories of democracy, and it was meant that all of our 50 state tax regimes could serve as models for what works and what doesn't work What we know from taxing personal income is that it doesn't work for economic expansion in any given state. And those states that have once did not tax personal income, they have chosen to decline as a part of the U.S. share of GDP, and we know that the 9 no-income tax states today are outperforming the other 41. So we have really strong evidence of what works. We have governors, recent actions by governors, such as Governor Sam Brownback of Kansas, that have basically zeroed out and following the model to be more like Texas for jobs and less like California for higher taxes. And that's encouraging for many others, including my home state that borders Kansas, because we'd like to see real economic expansion among the states. You also have ballot initiatives happening, New Hampshire just in 2 weeks, trying to make permanent in no circumstances would the government, their state government, tax personal income on things like lottery winnings. So there are many important issues that start in the states and can drive and inspire, I think, even change in Washington based on actual evidence, working knowledge of what creates jobs.
And real quickly, which 5 states do you view as having the best and worst state income taxes?
Well, the best states for keeping, not taxing your personal income would probably be Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Washington State, New Hampshire, and the others that have their personal income tax rates effectively at 0. The worst offenders, the regions that are losing the most wealth to those other environments, would include New York, Illinois, California, and states around them that also have marginal tax rates relatively high.
All right, last question for you, Travis. I understand that right now you're leading the effort to repeal Missouri's state income tax. Can you update us on your efforts?
Yeah, so we've spent over 4 or 5 years looking at all the data. Unfortunately, a state like ours, the Show Me State, has ranked 48th in relative and nominal GDP growth over the last decade. We've been a state that once had marginal tax rates relatively low, but now, because other states have dominated, they're taking a lot of that relative advantage away. So we have many plans for the ballot initiative process in our state to bring to the voters, at least by November of 2014, if not sooner through legislative action in 2013, a plan to reduce or completely eliminate the personal and corporate income tax rates in our state. We know it's absolutely essential when you have border wars like the state of Kansas that just effectively took small business tax rates from 6% in our state down to 0 if you do nothing but move literally across the road and repurpose your business as a subchapter S. So we think it's very important that we respond to this challenge, and that's our plans to do so.
All right, Travis Brown, thanks so much for being with us and for all your insight.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.